Good afternoon. Do you really know how strong your organization's resilience planning is? Does your company, agency, or department have the kind of rigorous procedures required by today's regulations and standards? Can you tell your management, yes, we are truly prepared for any interruption? DRI can help you get the definitive answer by providing an intensive, unbiased evaluation of your business continuity program and highlighting its strengths and areas of improvement. DRI's organizational certification program brings the same rigorous training and evaluation to companies that we provide for continuity professionals. Welcome to the latest in DRI's webinar series. I'm Russell Wooldridge, DRI Director of Development. Events like these give us a unique opportunity to shine a light on the current business continuity landscape and its future growth with a global audience. Discussing the value and purpose of these organizational evaluations are today's speakers. Al Berman, President and CEO of DRI International. Joseph Easter, MBCP, Senior Director of Risk Management Testing and Validation, Products and Practices, Business Continuity, and Crisis Management for Capital One. Mitch Simon, CBCP, Director of Business Continuity and Resilience at NYU Langone Medical Center, and Buffy Rojas Leach, DRI's Director of Communication. After their presentations, we'll open up the floor for a Q&A with the audience. Please use the question box, in most cases at the bottom of your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Simply type in your question at any time during the presentations. Address it to all panelists, and we'll respond to as many of them as we can during the question and answer portion. We also request that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the presentations, which can be checked by your name in the attendee screen on the right-hand column. Now let's hear from our panel. First up is Al Berman, President of DRI International, here to give us an overview of the origins and goals of the organizational review and certification. Al?
Thanks, Russell. Now, for many years, almost 27 years, DRI has been strictly certifying professionals in the field of business continuity and disaster recovery. DRI recognized a number of years ago that we really had the authority to accredit organizations. This came after much research after organizations asked us about the fact that we had accredited people. Could we accredit organizations? They had grave concerns about the fact that there were people giving accreditation who were untrained, who didn't meet standards. And so this became analogous to what we did in 2009 when we created Certified Business Continuity Auditor and Certified Continuity Business Lead Auditor in conjunction with ANSI and now with IRCA. So our idea was to recognize those organizations who demonstrated excellence and commitment in creating resilient organizations. We recognize that as an independent, globally recognized organization, that what we would do and what we would tell them and what we would accredit them for carried great weight. We never expected that this would become a mass organizational rollout for many companies. We felt it would be for very specific organizations, and so far to date, that's been true. So we created two certifications, or two credentials, if you would. One was a resilient enterprise. The other was the hub of resilience. The resilient enterprise really measured organizations against their own governance, their own policies and procedures. What we're trying to do is to see were they adhering to the policies and procedures that were approved by the board of directors or their CEO. We actually looked at some 250 documents is about the average of what we look at. We compare what they've said in writing, what the dictates were, to actually what they created. So when we looked at, for example, business impact analysis, we looked at exactly what they were trying to create, and then we looked at the process by which they did it, and then we reviewed the BIAs that were created. The only time we actually step in and say there needs to be modification is when we recognize the fact that they were not adhering to our regulations. I think that became the big issue for the First International Bank we actually worked with, who had operations in 9 different countries under 9 different regulations, and so we had to cross-reference them. But what we really do is review the whole process. So we review the assessment process, risk assessment, vulnerability analysis, business impact analysis. We look at the strategy aligned to the operational necessity. We look at the integration of plans. So we're looking at emergency response and crisis management and business continuity and disaster recovery and risk management all at the same time to try to make sure that there is one cohesive plan and one organization who has oversight for it. We're careful about making sure that the plans are integrated. We then look at the testing and the exercising, maintenance and awareness programs. And so when we do judge organizations for the Resilient Enterprise Accreditation, it's a holistic approach. It goes into the level of management, who's responsible, are the responsibles clearly aligned, do we understand everything that they're doing, and is it a cohesive plan? Hub of Resilience is at a totally different level. We realize that organizations, especially in healthcare, have a greater responsibility not only to their organization and their customers, but to the community at large. So we asked for those people who wanted to be Hub of Resilience to create an organization such that they were the focal point for an industry or a sector's exchange of ideas, the imparting of knowledge, the outreach into the organization, such that they were bringing the community, industry, and public sector leaders together to discuss how best to affect preparedness, as disasters not only affect their organization and their employees, but also the community at large. There's a need to view preparedness in a larger framework. This concept of resilient communities that we hear so much about is part of what we've integrated into the process of Hub of Resilience. So those really define the two processes. We really want to make sure that organizations are resilient. We want to make sure that the process by which we're reviewing them will have value to them beyond just the accreditation process. Let's talk a little bit about how we do it. The first thing, whether it's Hub of Resilience or Resilient Enterprise, and you cannot be a Hub of Resilience without being a Resilient Enterprise, is the process that we use, something called the Resilient Enterprise Assessment Program, REAP. And again, it goes back to using the governance and policies of the organization. It provides guidance to improving the governance. Again, it'll amend it with regulatory requirements and assess what they say against what they do. It establishes criteria, and those criteria may very well map to the 10 professional practices. It may map to ISO 22301. It may map to NFPA 1600. It may map to something totally different. We've seen hybrids of a lot of the regulations and standards merged into them. We've seen it such that emergency response is the dominant organization. But regardless of who it is, it's the ability to execute against what they say they're going to do. Questions are actually given to the organization. They will provide us the documents to answer those. Two things can happen. One, it either exists and is proven to exist against the policies and procedures, whereupon an affirmative answer is given. When that affirmative answer is given, we actually cite the document that contains it. So later on, at the point you're actually going through an auditor with your outside auditors or even internal audit, it really streamlines the process by which you can demonstrate your compliance. For those conditions that are negative, where you don't adhere to your own policy and procedure or regulation, we actually give you a suggestion on how to improve it. Again, we don't help you improve it. We actually tell you what we think you can do. And then, because the process is reiterative, we actually allow you to come back and show us that you've made that improvement. So the cycle time for most of the process is probably 3 or 4 months. There's a project plan, there's materials that demonstrate how we do it, there's status reports, and most of the things that you would associate with an assessment process. If you're seeking to be a hub of resilience, we also have something called the Hub Assessment Program. And that actually assesses how well you've built the communications program, how well you reach out into the community, are you a center for thought leadership? And again, this becomes a process that's reiterative. Being a hub is an ongoing process that almost nobody will ever finish because of the ability to reach out not only to your community, but to professional organizations, not only geographically, but it's industry-wide. So you may have a hub of resilience for a hospital chain in the Northeast and another one in the Southwest, each of those having their own radius, their own spoke, if you would. So you're looking at a hub and spoke type organization where the hub is really the hub of resilience and each of the spokes is resilient enterprise. The process, for those who've gone through it and those people who are going through it now, and you'll hear from some of those after me probably, will tell you that it is really intensive. People will tell you it's much harder than a normal audit, and it's meant to be that way. The idea is at the time you finish with this process, you will find out that going through the formal audit will be much easier for you, and you'll feel more confident about doing it. The other thing we're seeing is that organizations are actually just going through the assessment process. They really are not looking for accreditation because they're in the business of trying to understand how good their program is. You'll see them try to use the first assessment we do as a benchmark and against how much improvement they will make over an extended period of time where we will come back in and reassess them. And so we've had organizations that we know we're not ready to be a resilient enterprise, but we really would like to understand where our weaknesses are. The deliverables from reports to graphics to individual recommendations is extensive. The process, again, takes 3 or 4 months. And just remember, our goal is strictly to make the organization more resilient. We are not here to denigrate the program. We are not here to try to show that we know more than they do. This is a totally cooperative program. And I think for those who've gone through it, they will tell you that's true. Russell?
Thanks, Al. Next, we have Joseph Easter, Senior Director of Risk Management, Testing and Validation, Products and Practices, Business Continuity, and Crisis Management for Capital One. Joseph, welcome, and congratulations on receiving your MBCP, your Master Business Continuity Planner certification.
Thanks, Russell. I am really excited to have gotten my MBCP. That's a process that I've been through this year and glad to see it completed. And it's a great recognition of both my experience and the knowledge that I've gained. It's also been a really good experience working with DRI. And I appreciate the class that was offered to help me prepare for that. I felt really equipped for the exam after finishing the class and was then thrilled a few weeks later to receive my official accreditation. So regarding the Resilient Enterprise Certification, let me give you a quick overview of Capital One's continuity program first. We are not just a U.S. credit card company, but we are a global financial institution. We have operations in multiple countries like India, Canada, the UK, the Philippines, and throughout the world. And we are one of the top 10 banking institutions in the U.S. So for us, business continuity is not just something that we want to do, it is both an expectation of our regulators and our customers, and we take it very seriously here. So getting the Resilient Enterprise certification seemed like just a natural next step for us as we move forward in our journey. As part of that journey, we always like to look both internally and externally at how we can improve our program. And we have several tools internally, like most companies do. For example, we have an internal audit department that's going to assess our program. We also have self-assessments that we do to identify opportunities. We also are fortunate, I think, in the financial institutions space that we have our regulators who come in and periodically provide us with their assessments. And while those assessments can sometimes be scary, they actually provide really good outside expertise and identify problems and opportunities that maybe we hadn't seen internally. Along that same line, then, when we look at the opportunities that DRI provides through its certification program, we like the fact that it's an external body. It's someone who's not an expert already on the Capital One program. You can look at it, be very unbiased. As a nonprofit, DRI is not looking to sell us something or have ongoing services. It's truly an unbiased assessment of Capital One's business continuity program, helping us identify where our strengths are and helping us also identify where we have some opportunities for improvement. When I first saw the announcements from DRI, probably 2 years or so ago, around the Resilient Enterprise certification, I was immediately intrigued because, as I said, we're always looking at opportunities like this to better assess our program and identify places where we can improve. But it did take us a little while because we had competing priorities to be able to say we now have enough time and really to reach out to Russell and team to be able to identify what the process was, understand how much we were going to have to allocate internally. And I was really pleased to find out that the process itself is really very straightforward. And we're now in the midst of our certification review. And I'm really pleased that what we were told initially about the level of effort and our reality about that level of effort are turning out to be the same. Starting out the process, we had a very nice kickoff call to go over what the overall process would be like, talk about the timelines, make sure those timelines worked for Capital One and DRI. And then we were given a list of initial materials that we needed to gather. And those materials were very straightforward. They follow the professional practices that DRI has in place and were documents that we would have expected to turn over to an audit team or regulatory exam team similar to that. So we've been gathering those documents. We have regular check-in process calls with our counterparts at DRI, and they're making sure that we stay on track. And I really appreciate how DRI is project managing this to make sure that both their goals and our goals match and that we achieve both of those. So I think if I have any advice to offer anyone at this point, it would be that don't be afraid of the process. Keep in mind this is an assessment being provided back to your company. Even if opportunities are identified or for some reason you don't receive a score to get the certification on the first round, you've still had a lot of value added by improving the process, having the opportunity to look at where you can make enhancements to your program to make it better. And ultimately, I think that's what every one of us are looking for in our business continuity programs, is that furtherance of improved program over time. Also, keep in mind that the timeline for that review is something that's mutually agreed upon by DRI and the company. So if DRI suggests that they want to get it done in 6 weeks and you just don't think you're going to have enough resources to be able to respond to the request during that time period, that can be discussed with the project manager at DRI, and they can come up with a timeline that's going to work for both organizations. So, really, I think there's no downside to going through this. You're going to get good information back either way, and the timeline can be very flexible to meet the needs of the company. At the end of the assessment, ultimately, I'd like to receive the Resilient Enterprise certification, but that certification is really the secondary, and you've heard me talk a lot throughout this about the opportunities for improvement that'll be identified. And that's because that's really what's most important to me. I want to know, where are we doing really well, where perhaps we're doing so well that we're over-investing, and then most importantly, where do we have some opportunities for improving our program? And I think that, whether we receive the certification or not, that's going to mean success to me, is that we've got information that we can take away, tangible information that makes sense to us, and that it's been provided by DRI, who we trust. And as I mentioned earlier, as a nonprofit, I feel really good about knowing that DRI is not going to be identifying opportunities just so that they can come and sell us some additional services in the future. I think these are going to be tangible opportunities that we can actually go out and improve our program on actually very quickly in most cases.
Thank you, Joseph. Our next presenter is known to many of you in the healthcare space. Mitch Simon, CBCP, Director of Business Continuity and Resilience at NYU Langone Medical Center. NYU Langone Medical Center is DRI's first designated hub of resilience.
Thank you, Russell. Happy to be on the panel. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the goals of the hub of resilience. The real point in setting this up was we wanted to create a program for resiliency and preparedness for NYU Langone Medical Center that we really wanted to promote throughout the city and the state and so forth. And it's interesting because the program is not only for healthcare, but it's for all industries. We want other companies, other institutions to get this designation, because if that doesn't happen, the award is not very meaningful. So why don't we spend a couple of minutes talking about the Hub of Resilience and Resilient Organization Awards. These awards were established so that we could recognize organizations that have a commitment or that have demonstrated a commitment to preparedness and resiliency. And I think DRI realizes that every organization is different. There are those organizations that are going to look to set themselves up as what we call a resilient enterprise. And that is an award that goes to entities that have a commitment to business continuity, that they have a mature program, that they have a process in place. And by the way, to get these awards, you don't have to have a completed process. You just have to show that you actually have a process. Documents do not have to be complete, but you have to show that you have a methodology for setting yourselves up. There's also a Hub of Resilience Award, and that goes to resilient enterprises, as we discussed before, but they also have a dedication or commitment for making their organizations resilient and serving as a center for leadership, a center for providing information, education throughout the community and the industry. So the goal of the Hub of Resilience in our case is to really increase healthcare resilience throughout the city. We want to spread the word. We want to make sure that other institutions have a cradle-to-grave program. We want to share information, and because we are a hub of resilience, our goal is to show coalition leadership. So let's talk about how you get the Hub of Resilience or Resilient Enterprise designation. DRI puts you through a pretty comprehensive review. They go through documents that you have in your program. They're looking for organizational structure and governance from business continuity. They want to know that you have a process, a methodology to the way you do your work. They want to know that you have a process for planned testing, planned maintenance, that you have a training program and an awareness program. And then if you want to go for the Hub of Resilience designation, they will examine your program to make sure that you have initiatives, that you have a process in place for creating a center of information, that you are leading consortium efforts, that you're doing training and industry thought leadership. What they're really looking for in general, partnership, engagement, quality, and accessibility. So let's talk a little bit about the project plan for the Hub of Resilience. Before we actually started the efforts to get the award, to get the designation, DRI put together a detailed project plan for us. The plan spanned over 3 months, and it contained a lot of detailed steps that we were responsible for and that DRI would be responsible for. And that included reviewing project plans, kickoff meeting, collecting documents, scheduling interviews, reviewing the interview findings, scheduling a test of the plan, observing tests of the plan, adjusting findings, and what we ended up with was a very comprehensive audit report, which is actually better than an audit because it's just going to us. Areas that were assessed included program management, risk assessment, impactful events analysis. We looked at strategy selection, emergency response, developing and implementing business continuity plans, awareness programs and training, maintaining and exercise the plans, crisis communication, and coordination with external agencies. And for each of these 10 areas, DRI did a comprehensive assessment. I believe there were close to 200 questions in all that we got evaluated on, and they were looking for an overall score of 85 or above for us to get the Hub of Resilience award.
Thank you, Mitch. Finally, we have Buffy Rojas Leach, DRI's Director of Communications, to tell us a bit more about the need in our industry for this kind of extensive organizational review. Buffy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Russell. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working in the business continuity space for more than 20 years. After a few years as a newspaper reporter, I moved on to covering what was then called contingency planning. I was the editor-in-chief of Contingency Planning and Management, and then I held the same position at Continuity Insights. I also spent 6 years as the VP of Marketing and Communications for a continuity planning software provider. Over the course of that time, I've interviewed hundreds of continuity and resilience professionals, and I've been a resource for industry professionals seeking information. So I've spoken to many of you, trying to help you make connections and move your programs and the profession forward. I do much the same of that at DRI. Over the years, I've heard many wish lists, and near the top of almost every single one was the desire to be able to meaningfully benchmark continuity programs and actually sort of prove preparedness, a good housekeeping seal. That's why I'm so excited about the new organizational certification programs, Hub of Resilience and Resilient Enterprise, that Al Berman described earlier. These credentials are something that's long been missing in the business continuity sector. Continuity professionals have been clamoring for this for decades. There's a real need for these programs. And by building a network of organizations that have demonstrated excellence in continuity, well, then the entire business continuity community is strengthened. The Hub of Resilience program is also a way to share information, bringing industries and communities together around resilience. Look, anyone who's ever tried to get a speaking slot on the DRI conference program, or any vendor I've ever interviewed, will tell you that I am not a person who is tolerant of commercialism and sales pitches disguised as education. I'm just not. That's why I feel it's really important to be clear about what DRI is doing here. DRI is the nonprofit that helps organizations prepare for and recover from disasters. We achieve this through thought leadership, education, and accreditation. That's our mission. That's what we do. Our mission is not to sell consulting. We don't even offer consulting services. DRI is deeply, sincerely, and actively interested in preparedness and resilience of the business continuity community and the larger global community. And with these new organizational certification programs, we can all work together to advance both. I mean, really, what business continuity and resilience professional out there doesn't want an unbiased assessment and a better understanding of their program's weaknesses and how to fix them? That's what DRI is offering. It's a giant step forward for our profession, and I encourage all of you who have asked me these kinds of questions over the years to investigate these programs and strongly consider participating. This is important stuff.
Thanks, Buffy. Now for your questions. Mitch, Al, and I are happy to answer as many as we can in the time we have left. If you have a question, you can type it into the bar at the bottom right hand of the window. Please make sure it's addressed to all panelists.
We're now on our live section, and it's interesting that it's always interesting in these question and answers that the questions that pop up seem to get answered by our speakers. But we've got with us this afternoon Mitch Simon from Langone Medical Center in New York City, and Mr. Berman from DRI, our DRI president, to answer a few of your questions. And the first one that came up was for Mitch. Mitch, some of these specific areas that were assessed in your Resilient Enterprise Certification Program, can you tell us how detailed some of those individual sections were?
Sure, Russell. So there are 10 areas that are actually assessed. We had 10 to 20 questions for each of the areas. I think I covered it in the webinar. It's program management, risk assessment, impactful events, strategy, emergency response, developing and implementing business continuity plans, awareness programs and training, maintaining and exercise the plans, crisis communications, and coordination with external agencies. But there's one thing that I have to emphasize, and this is a really important point. You don't have to have, for instance, in number 6, we spoke about developing and implementing business continuity plans. Everything doesn't have to be completed for you to apply for certification. You just have to show that you have a process in place. So as long as you've got that set up, you can still apply for this certification.
Excellent. Al, one of the questions that we keep getting is how does this certification differ from the ISO 22302 certification? I'm sorry, ISO 22301 certification
It's
program.
inflation, Russell. Let me address that. As most of you know, you're actually regulated in ISO 22301, like BS 25999 before it, is really a standard and not what the regulators are looking for. We differ a great deal. First of all, we're a lot more comprehensive. So where ISO 22301 doesn't really go into technical recovery, we spend time looking at your technical recovery. But more importantly, we look at your governance and your policies and procedures as approved by the board of directors. We're not here to tell you to change your standard. We're not here to tell you that you should use the professional practices. I think of the 4 that we've done, 3 of them were different than everybody else's. So you wouldn't expect that healthcare organization would be the same as a financial services organization, would be the same as a manufacturing organization. So our accreditation is different. I think Mitch will tell you it's probably the most thorough examination he's been through. But again, our objective is to make you more resilient, to make sure you're following your own policies and procedures, your own governance, and to help you on the road to making a far more resilient organization.
Another one of the questions we keep getting is along the same lines, is the idea about the framework, whether it's a PS Prep or a NFPA 1600, which I think you've addressed. But the question becomes, is this a U.S.-centric or U.S.-specific program? Will we be able to do that and engage in this, outside the U.S. market?
Good question. In fact, we are now starting to look at it in Japan, for example, to understand what we're doing. The framework is not US-centric. ISO 22301, for example, is not US-centric. It really is your own governance. Actually, the whole process started from a request in the Middle East. We were working on the United Arab Emirates standard, and they were looking for a way to be able to assess how well organizations were doing against their standard. And that's really the start of this program. And so as we start to look at this, we should start to understand that it's much different for different parts of the world, and we take that into consideration. So our auditors are our audit program is not only ANSI certified, but it's also IRCA certified, which you'll find it's based in the UK and is used extensively in Asia.
Excellent. An additional question about the hub award. We have the 2 levels of assessment, certified company, and then of course the hub of resilience. If you are already 22301 certified, how does that impact moving towards hub?
I don't think we actually will review the whole process. So first you have to be a resilient enterprise before we can even consider you for the hub award, i.e. you have to be resilient yourself before you can make the community resilient. I think Mitch can elaborate a lot about the 2 different processes we went through. But we will not accept anybody else's credentialing as a prerequisite for ours.
Excellent. Mitch, do you want to address that as well?
Yeah, what we had to do is actually, as Al indicated, there's 2 parts to the assessment. We actually went through the resilient enterprise assessment first, and then we went through the hub of resilience assessment. And the difference is, to get the hub of resilience designation, you have to serve as a center for providing information, education, and thought leadership throughout the community and industry. And from our perspective, we wanted to really increase healthcare resilience throughout the city. We lead coalitions. We're trying to spread the word about what we're doing with respect to our, a business continuity and resilience program. And we also want to share ideas. That's the whole idea. Share ideas and, promote leadership throughout the industry.
Excellent. how are you using, what metrics, how does this play into the metrics that you use to determine ROI for your program, Mitch?
It's funny, with respect to business continuity and resilience, we don't really look at metrics from a financial perspective. We want to know as an enterprise that we are best prepared to deal with any crisis that we may face. This hospital went through a major Sandy was a major event to this hospital. The hospital suffered close to $2 billion worth of damages. And at this point, we just want to know that we are doing everything that we can do to be best prepared to face any type of a crisis.
Al, I'm going to follow up on that with a question we've gotten a couple of times so far, as it relates to the organization's insurance coverages and that sort of thing. Does demonstrating this kind of leadership, what kind of impact on ROI can you, given your experience, tell us about?
I think one of the things is, and it's the search for the holy grail for business continuity people, is what's the ROI? One of the things that we do that nobody else does is look at your insurance coverage. I think one of the ways you can really demonstrate the ROI, I can give you an example. I had worked for a healthcare organization, and one of the questions that the CFO came to me with was, what should our business interruption insurance be? And they hadn't really tried to coordinate the use of business continuity against what the losses would be for an interruption. Long story short, Russell, what we did was we reduced their insurance premiums by 35%. They wound up with the same protection because we actually tied the business impact analysis to the business interruption insurance. And it's something every organization should do. The more we talk to organizations about this, it starts to bring together what we're trying to do, and that's the resilience, bringing risk management and the insurance arm of that together with the business continuity people. And if you really want to show up an ROI, i.e. a reduction in actual expenditures, this is one way to do it.
Well, we talk a lot. You and I have talked a lot, and we talk a lot in DRI at various events to folks that are believing that resilience, or rather business continuity and risk management and all of the various disciplines are converging, but there's still a lot of organizations out there that have unique BCP teams and unique DR teams and unique risk teams. Can this kind of REAP assessment be done for both programs, all programs, or is it handled individually? How would we handle a company that's still siloed very effectively?
I think we just completed one for an organization that, like many other organizations, started out small, with risk management in one place and enterprise emergency management in one place and crisis management. And what came out of our report and what came out of our analysis is that they had really great strengths in silos, but no combination of it. End result is that they've reorganized and had come up with a process by which all of the groups work together under one umbrella. The insurance people are happy. The risk management people are just delighted with the fact that they have an entree into the business. And so the conclusion is they had really strong organizational strengths in pockets, but had to be reorganized as an organization. And once they did that, they found incredible leveraging of those resources. So we do spend a lot of time looking at the organizations. Having been an ex-CEO, a lot of the problems that we find in companies are the organizational structure. And once that's remedied, everything else seems to fall in place.
So in a world where, I think we need to address this again, in a world where there are such a multiplicity of BCM standards being used by a variety of companies and a variety of industries, how does the DRI organizational certification program fit into all of those various standards and practices?
Clearly, our objective is not to tell you what standard to use. Much of what we've learned over the last few years from independent surveys is that professional practices is the most used standard in the world. But we don't ask you to do that. We ask you to tell us what your board of directors has approved, what your organization has approved, and we actually mark you against what you said you're supposed to be doing. Mitch can tell you that we never tried to impose new standards on him. We never told him one standard was better than the other. And in fact, Mitch will tell you we never used the word best practices. The only thing we augmented was where we saw that there might have been some non-compliance with the regulations. And so we cited that. In fact, somebody asked the question, do we do this domestically, only domestically? Well, one of the banks we did actually has branches and operations in 10 different countries. So not only did we compare them to what they said they were doing, we actually compared them to the standards of those 10 different countries.
Well, that is actually, you jumped my next question. We have one person who's located in Panama, which I assume from the list of names throughout the throughout our participants, we've got quite a few internationals present. We thank you guys for tuning in from a distance via the web. If a company that wants to be to go through the program is located outside of the United States, what kind of model do we use in that case? Is it remote? Do we go on site? Is it both? Tell us about that process.
The process itself is we part of this is my background, coming out of PricewaterhouseCoopers and working with the audit practice, and in fact training business continuity auditors, is to make sure that the documentation is in line with what the organizations asked for. And then we will supplement that with some interviews. But again, we really audit the documentation. I think the last place we were, there were 612 different documents that we went through. And the advantage of that is when the auditors come in, the regulatory auditors come in, we actually cite places where you're in compliance. So if you're not in compliance with something, we will make a recommendation again to try to make you more resilient. If you are in compliance, we will actually cite the document that you can just give to the auditors. But our process really is to make sure that you're working under you're actually executing the governance that's been approved by your board. But yes, and we do it multilingual. We actually have somebody sitting in Costa Rica who's obviously fluent in Spanish, but our team is fluent in, I think, 6 different languages.
Okay, that's excellent. Okay, so since you're talking about our crew and who can, and the languages and so forth, another popular question this afternoon has been who from DRI is actually doing these assessments? Who's involved? Is it volunteers? Is it staff? Is it instructor? Who's doing these assessments?
At this point, we're using mostly staff. The requirement is that the person who leads the team has to be a certified business continuity lead auditor. Most of you who are familiar with the audit process know that you have to have an auditor at the helm. We usually have 2 of them on the project, and then we supplement it with staff. In the case where we were working with NYU Langone, we actually brought in an outside consultant who worked with them, who was an expert in hospitals. So where we need to augment our staff, we will do that. But for the most part, we try to do it with internal staff, all of whom are certified, all of whom are at least MBCPs, and an administrative portion to our staff.
Excellent. One person who's put in a question has said it's not been made clear why we should go with DRI International and as opposed to ISO, and I think that stands for a little elaboration.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that if you're going for ISO certification, one of the reasons you might want us to look at it before the assessment team comes in is we train those assessors. We are ANSI certified to train ISO CENS. We're IRCA certified, so we train certifying bodies. In fact, we certify those people who certify organizations. And so we understand what the process is. you can do it. In fact, we've had one organization who said, we're not really looking for accreditation. We're not looking for the credential, but we really want somebody to come in pre-audit. And I think the advantage is you come in with us giving you recommendations on how you can improve your process before you get the assessors coming in from ISO.
Okay, so what materials are available to allow our listeners to make the decision to go for this kind of program? Is there a pre-audit checklist, or are there materials that we can provide for them so that they can know if they're ready for this kind of assessment?
What you'll get from us is some materials on the process. You'll also get a project plan, so you'll know what your organizational commitment is versus DRI's organizational commitment. And then you'll understand, and you'll get some samples as to exactly what we're doing. We'll cite the documentation we're going to look at. We'll cite which interviews we may need to do. But you'll get a thorough look at the process. And just remember, most of us have been in this business for a long time and have worked with large audit firms and large consulting firms. So the process will feel familiar to most people.
Excellent. For our last question, Mitch, is there anything that you that you would like to add to what Al's been addressing? Anything about the process or about the way DRI came in and conducted the program?
No, I just thought, well, it's a great process. And the reason what I liked about it, again, it's an assessment of what we're doing. Al mentioned something that's really important, and that is the following. They didn't hold us to a formal BIA or a business continuity plan. As a matter of fact, what we're doing here at NYU Langone Medical Center, we're pushing resilience plans. And Al went through, and DRI went through those resilience plans to make sure that they were thorough and complete. I guess my point here is they're not enforcing standards or set standards, predefined standards on the way you do things, as long as you're doing things in a thorough and comprehensive manner. You could do things the way you see best fit.
Okay, one final question for you, Al. We've had a number of people mention that they have large organizations, 5,000 employees plus, 10,000 employees plus. For this final remark, an organization of that size, how do you measure the BCM awareness level for an organization like that through the REAP program?
I think that's a really good question. I think awareness programs are the things that most organizations have problems with. What we're looking for is a program that reaches out to the individuals in their organization, whether it's a newsletter or it's a place on their website where people can look at it. The idea is we're going to look at the outreach. How do you get to people? How current is it? Is it more dynamic than it is static? Are people aware of events before they come? So we have a lot of organizations, NYU will tell you that, and a couple of the banks we're working will tell you, where they're warning their staff about hurricanes, for example, or if it's tornado season, those kind of things. But it's really making sure that the employees understand what they're doing. After all, what we're really trying to do is make our employees calm and confident under duress. We want them to know that we're prepared for what's happening. We want them to work in an environment that they feel is safe, and hence they become more productive.
Thanks, Mitch. Thank you, Al, for answering our listeners' questions today. You can learn even more about the Organizational Certification and REAP program by visiting the link displayed on the screen. If you still have questions that we didn't cover, or if you'd like to discuss certification options one-on-one, give us a call at 866-542-3744. A recording of this and all our other webinars is posted on MyDRI. I'm Russell Wooldridge, and this webinar has been a production of DRI International 2016, all rights reserved. Thank you for your attention.